Let's go ahead. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, also acting as the Law and Justice Council on May 17th. We're starting a few minutes after 9 a.m. It's good to be here and have all of you present. So to begin, I would like to read this land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. All right, I think we've got about, I think we might have picked up one more anyway. So I'm going to take things slightly out of order. I apologize. I have to leave pretty early today, about 9:40. I'm not in my usual spot. I'm in the East County, but with internet. We've got a spot with internet, so I can be on here for a little bit. But what I'd like to take out of order is number 3, report on plans for the Index Committee. And the reason we wanted to highlight this is at our next meeting, both the steering committee, the Index Committee chair, and the co-chairs believe it's important to have a pretty broad discussion about Index Committee, what it can do, what it can't do, what it's accomplished, and how things are going with it. By way of some background, the Index Committee was formed in large part to satisfy a need to have consistent data for the different stakeholders and committees within the task force. For example, there was a lot of talk about a system Spillman, the sheriff's office, was using, and having the ability to understand who was in the jail. And it's my understanding that great progress has been made with the dissemination of the Spillman data as well as other things. However, there are still areas in data that are significant challenges for a variety of reasons. Some of them are paper. Some of that may be these data needs haven't been able to be priorities, whether that's because of COVID or other lack of staff resources. But it seemed that for Index to be functional, an understanding of what they can do, where some of their barriers are, and also to communicate to the task force as a whole what are reasonable expectations of data, and I think just all of us to get on the same page. So the plan for the next meeting, I think Stephen and we talked about envisioning this might take 30 to 45 minutes. So we would have Lieutenant Erickson give a kind of a summary. He's the chair of the Index Committee, of where things are, what the accomplishments are, where the challenges are. And then I think just kind of have hopefully a robust conversation and let everyone know where we are. And hopefully for those people that are part of this committee that can positively impact data needs, either through providing more data or understanding what could be provided, we can move forward with that. All right, Stephen, have I covered our conversation?
Yeah. And so you can tell from Jack's comment that we want to devote enough time to actually understand where we are and point in some directions for where we want to go and where we need to go. So expect that in June. I know will be the summer, but I hope we can have pretty good attendance and pretty good participation in that. All right, we're going to go back to the order of the agenda, and I'm just going to say I've encouraged Jack to slip out when he needs to. He might go dark anytime. I'll try to handle any questions that arise hereafter.
I'll be good for at least a half hour, Stephen. Yeah. Thanks.
We'll go back to the agenda item on committee reports, and the first up there is behavioral health. Dan or Mike, are you on?
Doesn't look like we have Dan or Mike with us yet today.
Okay, let's hold off on them. I do see Arlene, and I thought I saw Raylene on the list. Legal and justice systems, and there was a joint behavioral health, legal and justice systems committee meeting that was held. Would either or both of you please catch us up on those?
Arlene, you're muted.
Okay. The last meeting was a joint meeting, and it focused primarily on what services have been and are available for reentry. The year-long pandemic has cut seriously into whatever reentry services we had, so that was really not present. I just think it's a giant gap. So we really have to address this issue entirely.
And where did the discussion go?
Raylene, do you have anything to add to what I'm saying?
It was a very lengthy meeting, and we really didn't get through all of the items on the agenda. We wanted to touch on domestic violence and some other items, but it was a good discussion. I think it's going to be revisited in the upcoming year on different things that we can do in Legal Justice Committee. I want to make a side note, as it's probably going to be discussed later, but I wanted to say thank you to all of the members that assisted in the draft of the committee report on Moonwater, and Darlene and Stephen and Dave Freeman, Judge Freeman and Judge Garrett. Bruce, I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but everybody contributed to try to get what needed to be done. And unfortunately, I didn't help out as much as I would have liked to, but I really appreciate everybody that contributed to that. And I think we're going to see some changes and some positive things in the next year. But I don't have a whole lot to add. I'm not going to read through the summary for everybody. I think we're all capable of that. So I'll let you guys move on to the next topic, and thank you.
Okay, thanks to both of you. Crisis Stabilization Center, I guess that's you, Ann. You're up.
Good morning. So Jill put a link in the agenda, and I'm not sure if all of you have seen this, but on the Whatcom County website, there is a link that shows there you go. Why don't we go through this real quick? Jill, are you able to push it through? This is what's on our website. This, of course, is the front of the building, which is lovely. And then as you go through, it really talks about how we got started, makes reference to the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, and makes reference to the fact that the health department did a behavioral health facilities needs assessment back in 2016. And then in 2017, there was the regional process. And those two processes helped us get state funding as well as some regional funding. And then, of course, we used local funding for the remainder from the behavioral health program fund. And so as you go through, the building came in around $12 million. It's a very, very complicated building. This is kind of a goofy picture, but it's the way it turned out once it came on the internet. But you can see that each side is a mirror of the other. So each of those L's represents a treatment unit, 16 beds on each side. And we had told the architect, of course, make this look as inviting as possible. Thus, the outside looks more like a lodge than an institution. And then the outdoor areas are at the top of the picture. And so as we go through this, and if we can advance, of course, this is the groundbreaking, and you'll see Jack Hovenier on the far left is one of our chairs of the task force, and Sharon Shoemake, representative, was instrumental in getting us the initial operational funding to fill the gap. And then you've got Barry Buchanan, our council member, Jack Lowes at the time next to me. This was embarrassing, but I couldn't quite get my shovel in, and Jack had to reach over and push it in for me. But that didn't get on tape, thankfully, or recording. And then you have Joe Timmons, who is with the governor's office next to me. And then Scott Eisenhart from the Tiger Construction. And Tiger Construction is the company that won the bid to build this very complicated building. And then to his left, right to the picture, is Rusty Noble from our facilities department. And then Ron Wright and his associate Sandra Callies are the architects. So there you go. This building is still facing all the minor things that happen with a very complicated building, whether it comes from HVAC and airflow systems to security issues, making sure that each side has access to the cameras they need, etc. As you can imagine, lots and lots of cameras in this building. And then during the groundbreaking, of course, Jack Lowes, who was county executive at that time, gave a speech, as well as others. And if we can keep going down, and Sharon gave a little speech here, and I'll let you guys see this later, but you can push on the hello, and there's Barry Buchanan, and there is the plaque that is right outside the, oh, thanks. The plaque right outside the door that talks about the council members who approved the building of this, the county exec at the time. And then thank you to the different funders, which is really up on top, the state, the regional facility, as well as our local behavioral health funds. And then as we go through this, there's some pictures of the inside. So this side is the Pioneer Human Services side, which offers the substance use withdrawal management services. And as you recall, this is a step up from the original model. So they actually have 24/7 nursing now. No one needs to go to the emergency department first. They can not only test for COVID as they come to this site, but they also can do any other admission screening to make sure people are medically stable enough to be here. And then as we go through, here's pictures of the lounge area, and that door to the back goes out to the outdoor area. And then other lounge, and then the bedrooms are a bit sparse. And so we have talked with a local artist community to have artists come and paint murals on the walls. So they may or may not paint them in some of the bedrooms, especially on the mental health side. The concern was that that might be triggering or too much stimulus for people, and that sometimes people prefer very little stimulus in a bedroom. And so that there will certainly be common areas where there's room for murals. So we're very excited about that. And we have some organizations that are willing to help fund that project. And that will help fancy up the walls and make it more like home. And then that's the other lounge area towards the back. And then if we keep going, it's a horrible picture of me, but that's a great picture of our Representative Alicia Rule, who just was very successful in getting us our $200,000 a year for this year and next year to help support operational funding, and also to identify this project as a pilot program for diverting people from the criminal justice system to treatment instead. So this is a fabulous thing that was successful in the state legislature this year. We really wanted to hold ourselves out as the pilot program so that we could show the state the benefits of a treatment unit that can serve as diversion, both from the emergency room as well as the criminal justice system. And because of that, hopefully ensure funding in the future. And then lastly, and you'll see County Exec Sat Paul Sadu was with us this day, and we're talking to the kitchen manager at this time. And as you see, this is a full commercial kitchen. It's pretty impressive. And they are going to be serving meals not only here, but they'll be preparing meals for the new recovery house as well that's due to open here in the next couple months. And that we can keep going down. And then the outdoor area, I just wanted you to see this because this is one of the coolest things. This grass is called Nomo Grass. It actually doesn't grow any taller than this, and you don't need to mow it. So I don't understand why they have it. I don't understand why I don't have it in my yard, but this is pretty cool. And then we are also building a couple little overhead gazebos outdoors, keep people from the sun when it's shady, or shady when there's sun, or dry when there's rain. And then on each treatment unit, there's a large office area covered in windows so that they can not only monitor the treatment unit, but also have some ability for confidential work. And then, of course, the front door as you come in the lobby. And again, on that one wall, there's going to be some gorgeous murals. And so that is what is on our website. And 2026 Division Street is the new address. This single phone number will get people to the Crisis Stabilization Center. I believe if you press number 2, you get the mental health side of the house, and number 5, the detox or substance use or withdrawal management side of the house. So thank you very much for doing that, Jill. So this obviously is a pretty cool thing. We are working with the state and actually got the state to redo their actuarial studies to increase, to basically account for these increased beds in our community, which then gave the go-ahead for the 5 managed care organizations to increase their support of it operationally. That was our other concern. We couldn't figure out why they were not doing their job as we thought, which is to pay for this on a 24/7 basis. And having those negotiations with the healthcare authority really helped that. So right now we feel like we've got adequate operational funding with the additional service dollars that a Representative Rule got for us. And we are currently in the process of putting together some metrics to help document not only the diversion, but also the impacts of that diversion from the criminal justice system, so we can present it to the state and hopefully secure funding throughout without having to go to the legislature and ask for it every session. So questions? Arlene, I see you had your hand up.
This is not a question.
Oh.
But having worked in the other building for 10 years, I can only tell all the rest of you the contrast is monumental, most especially in the sleeping quarters. because everyone slept in one large area. There was no privacy in that respect. And so this is a great step forward. The other piece that's really also quite important is the kitchen. The food and the quality of the food is hard to describe what it was before, but I'll just say anything will be better, and fresh cooked food would be 100 times better. So it looks wonderful, Anne. I mean, what a great job of, you know, every aspect that I can see. And if the staff equals the building, that would be really wonderful too.
Well, obviously, these monumental efforts are a collective effort, and a number of people on this call had input into this program in this building, to include the design of the building. This one didn't show the large conference room, but there is a large conference room right off the lobby that we're going to use not only for care coordination efforts, but sometimes if there are support groups that come in from the outside, those will be available for people that are current guests at the facility. And then there's also training and other activities that can be done in that conference room. So it can hold quite a few people. And there's a huge monitor TV there that will help in those efforts. Right now, the detox side of the house is fully operational in terms of 16 beds open and utilized. Right now on the mental health stabilization side, they are up to 10 capacity, and they are hiring and in process of training some people, and then they'll be able to bring it up further. And then in terms of the involuntary status of this program, which of course is our long-term goal for the mental health side, we believe that the additional funding we've gotten will help bring that up to snuff. And at this point, it's really just about hiring 2 additional staff to make that happen. And again, Compass Health is the provider of that service. And as you've heard before, the mental health workforce is in pretty serious shape right now, in the sense that we simply don't have enough people to do the work. So we hope not only to get those people hired, but then to work with Compass Health to recertify their program as a triage facility with involuntary placement, which doesn't mean that everybody has to be involuntary to be there. Actually, the majority of people will always be voluntary guests, but it does allow a police officer the opportunity to place somebody there instead of the jail and hold them for up to 12 hours while an evaluation is done, and hopefully some encouragement for the person to concentrate on maybe next steps. Questions?
Raylene has her hand.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank you and everybody else that was involved in this. It's a great thing that's being done in our county. My second question is on the involuntary with law enforcement drop off. I know that there was some steps that we're trying to get around, whether they could be dropped off without having to go to the hospital first. Have we jumped through those hurdles, or where are we at on that?
There is no ability to take, there's no necessity to take somebody to the hospital first. So on-site medical screening for admission is available on both sides. So when a first responder is transporting and they call to make sure there's a bed available, they will be asked a few questions. There might be some indicator that there might be a more pressing medical issue that needs to be looked at first at the emergency department. So it's not impossible that would happen, but for the most part, medical screening for admission now occurs on site for both sides. And both sides has the ability to perform and conduct COVID screening as well.
Excellent. So does that mean we are on board with training for all law enforcement to be dropping off at this point?
We are working on that right now. Because we don't, it's still voluntary. However, we've had a number of police drop-offs, and We first were working with BPD and the sheriff's office. And once we work out those bugs, which I think we're almost there, then we were going to do some formal training on with all the different jurisdictions.
That's excellent. And just to go back to our last behavioral health combination meeting, the lack of providers is definitely a concern that was brought up at that meeting for many different things, including the new system to be dialing 988. I believe everything was on board for that for Bellingham as a trial run, but we're still making sure that we have adequate providers, which seems to be a struggle in a lot of areas. So that's definitely something the task force wants to be looking at and thinking about.
Yes, we had a huge discussion last Friday with the Regional Administrative Service Organization and all 5 MCOs and the State Healthcare Authority about the shortage in workforce and what kinds of strategies are being put in place to try to address it. It's huge. So, and it's complicated. So working on that. But
And you mentioned setting out on the task of quantifying the financial benefits of diversion and presenting that to, I guess, allow administrative direction of funds and avoid legislative allocation. Do you have a time frame for that? What would be realistic? And I assume you'll be sharing it with the task force when you've completed it.
so there's a couple steps. First of all, because of the new money and the requirement in the legislative proviso to collect data, the money for that operational funding is going to go through the Regional Behavioral Health Administrative Services Organization. And so we're waiting for them to get the contract from the Healthcare Authority. And in that contract, it will be listed what requirements the state is going to ask for in terms of data collection. And then once we see that, we'll add what we want to know locally or regionally. And then probably vet it through both our Behavioral Health Advisory Committee as well as this committee to make sure that we've done that. And then, as you recall, we also established a program advisory committee for this Crisis Stabilization Center that involves EMS, law enforcement, treatment providers. So lots of different people to check through, but we can't really do anything until we find out what the Healthcare Authority is going to ask for in contract, and then we'll build on that. I shouldn't say we can't do it. We've obviously had lots of discussions, but we just want to be aligned with what the Healthcare Authority is asking for.
So that's sort of a side piece to operational funding for the time being, and we'll go through the legislature until that process is completed, the data justification process.
Well, we have 2 years of funding, 200,000 a year to help fill any gaps. So we don't really have to worry about this right now. I think we have what we call an interlocal leadership structure meeting, which is the one I attended last Friday, that has attendance from the Healthcare Authority, all 5 MCOs, and the regional ASO. So all the funders of operations are in that meeting. And then that's where I think we'll have all of our initial conversations. But there also was a crisis stabilization report that was completed by the state that was mandated of the Healthcare Authority after the first legislative proviso that Representative Shoemake got for us. And I should, Jill, I will send that to you and you can distribute that out. But in that set of recommendations, they obviously look at a couple things. One, how do you ensure that the funders fund this as a firehouse, that it's available 24/7, fully funded for those operations? And then also, to what extent can it be used for diversion from the emergency department, higher crisis level services, as well as criminal justice system? So they had some great recommendations that are also helping move this forward. And then this legislative this legislative session also had language in about collecting data and prioritizing some crisis stabilization centers. So I feel like our hard work has really helped move the state forward in this regard. I think for a while this was an ignored service, to be honest with you. I think it was kind of like on a back burner that was never used. And so we, I think, have brought it into the headlights. So that's good for us.
Well, I'll just add my voice of appreciation of what an incredible accomplishment this is, but I'd also note that I think you were overly modest in downplaying of what an incredible leadership job you've done and sort of bringing this to the point we're at and having services rolling out. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Ann? Okay, I think Barry's on with the steering committee report. Hello, Barry.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. How are you? We had our steering committee meeting back on May 6th, and the first item we talked about was kind of the subjects we're delving into right now. We framed out the agenda for this meeting. A couple of things we have coming up later today is the update on the behavioral health crisis response and update on development of a racial equity commission. That'll be covered later in the meeting. Also, we worked on the update of the annual report, and Jill is going to be presenting kind of the status on that this morning. We spent a lot of time talking about the index committee, and as Jack noted, that we had suggested that we have a kind of an intro to the thinking about the index committee today, and then a much more in-depth discussion on it come the June meeting. We actually ran the clock out on the meeting. We were over time, and we had like 5-6 more agenda items that we're going to be taking up, and that'll be the task force's strategic plan. We need to take a fresh look at that. We've been talking about a communication strategy for the group, and we will be delving into that at our next meeting. And then the America Rescue Plan Act and what that means for the task force and the work that we do. And there's still a lot of, I will say confusion, but there's unknowns in how some of that money can be spent, but we're learning more, as each day goes by. The question came up, should the task force join the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, the GARE program? We didn't get to that yet that day, so we're going to take that up again at our next meeting. So that really kind of sums it up what the steering committee talked about, and be happy to take any questions.
I don't see any. Thank you very much, Barry. That was a thorough report. And so we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is Jill updating us on the status of the annual report so many of you have been working on. Jill.
Good morning, everyone. This is just a quick reminder that the annual report to the County Council and County Executive is due the end of June, and it's required by ordinance. I emailed you all the draft of the report on Friday. Please take a look at that sometime over the next week or two. If you have comments, feel free to email those to me. I would like to have any comments sent to me by June 1st. After that, I will schedule the draft report before the steering committee on June 6th, and then a final draft will come to you on June 17th for approval and submission. So if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for all your work pulling this together. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yes, Jill, it's an impressive report that you've put a lot of work into. I really think you did a fabulous job.
Thank you, Ann.
Okay, we have updates from the various jurisdictions, and I hope I get them all. I saw Dave Reynolds on the call. Dave? I think I saw Dave. Do you have anything to report from Superior Court? No. Sheriff Elfo?
The only thing I have, and I think I spoke at the larger or the regular committee, is that we're still trying to navigate what these changes in the statutes and how we're going to be able to handle behavioral health issues. And, the practice now is for our behavioral health deputies or mental health deputies to respond to, families that have problems that are escalating and may not quite be a crime or an imminent threat to safety. So we're going to have to kind of find out what the new legislation, what the intent was. And we're going to be working with Eric on that and with our partners, but it is going to have an impact. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Darlene, Bellingham Municipal Court.
Good morning. I don't really have anything other to report. Similar to the sheriff, we're waiting to see how some of the new legislation is going to affect the court. The Blake decision, where possession of drugs will now be a misdemeanor. And there's some DOL legislation where they have come up that DWS thirds will no longer go to driver's suspension for failure to pay fines. And that's something that people have wanted for a long time. So I think that will make an impact and help more people to be able to get their licenses. There's a little bit more involved with that, but those are a couple of things that we're dealing with and trying to prepare for. Our jail program, diversion program with the bracelets, the GPS and Scram is continuing to work well. And that's about all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Raylene, anything to report from up in your neck of the woods? And I see you have Chief Tank with you also in case there's a law enforcement piece of that.
I think a lot of the things are just going to be repeated from Sheriff Elfo and Darlene. The DWS third doesn't go into effect until January of 23, if I read that right on the legislative updates. And I did see a webinar that I attended that has an up program through InCourt for payments. It's a payment options that courts can opt into to pay for multiple tickets out of multiple courts, which may be beneficial, but I need to research that a little bit more. I don't know if Darlene has looked any more onto that. That might be able to assist some individuals prior to that law taking into effect. I did have some questions on the new DWS third going into gross misdemeanor. It did say that people will be diverted to treatment before they would be prosecuted, and a question on, we have lack of treatment counselors available in this area, and so how's that going to happen? So there's a lot of questions out there with the new legislation that's coming up. I did want to say on a positive note, I've been informed that the city of Linden, if they haven't already, will be shortly entering into a contract with Friendship Diversion Services, so they are looking at using jail alternatives. I also heard rumor that Ferndale will probably be jumping on board with that. So it'd be interesting after they've done so to see how things are working for the other two cities that haven't joined and will be joining. So that's all I have. Chief Tanksley, do you have any more?
I don't have anything further to add other than to ask Ann with regard to the new center. Is it possible to get tours of the center? You may have covered that, but I had some technical difficulties earlier. So, I mean, it would be interesting for me and some of my staff to, actually come down there and to get a better understanding, if that's possible.
For you, yes, it is possible. We have patients there now, so confidentiality is an issue, but obviously for first responders and our partners in law enforcement, I will connect you to the two providers so that you can schedule that, but you
Thank
would be
you.
more than welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raylene. Thanks, Chief. Are there any other jurisdictions that have any updates to share? Darlene.
Sorry, had an uncooperative mouse. I just wanted to point out something that we've talked about, and this kind of goes along with the index committee, is that the new case management system for the courts of lower jurisdiction that will be Odyssey, which is the same system as Superior Court uses. The actual case management system will not be implemented for another 3 years. We had originally thought it was going to come sooner. They're starting parts of it, but the actual case management system is at least 3 years away. So that was a little disappointing, but I just wanted to update everybody that that's where we're at.
Great. Thank you, Darlene. Any other jurisdictions? All right, I don't see any there. So we'll get an update on the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Program. Surprisingly, that's Anne again. Anne, you've been busy.
Yes, that is my job with lots of great staff. So I'll spare you the PowerPoint since I think most of you here have seen it, but it is in your packet. But I wanted to let you know really how we're moving forward. It was requested initially by City Council, Bellingham City Council, that we look at forming a team of non-law enforcement individuals to respond to people in crisis, in behavioral health crisis, who typically call 911, but perhaps the response from law enforcement isn't necessary or maybe not even appropriate. And so we did a lot of work, we meaning a committee that involved the Sheriff's Office, Bellingham Police Department, our current unarmed team, the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team that responds about 150 times a month to calls for people in crisis, as well as others, EMS as well. And in our meetings, we looked first of all at what are different programs happening throughout the nation that do similar work. What can we learn from them? What are some common threads or elements that the successful programs have? And then we worked a lot with dispatch, both WATCOM, that's the 911 dispatch, as well as Prospect, which is the arm of 911 that dispatches EMS, paramedics, EMTs. And we looked at how we might form a team that could do this work, but was not duplicative of what we already have. So like I said, we have a mobile crisis outreach team. They already respond to people experiencing behavioral health crises. And sometimes they're actually dispatched, if you will, from law enforcement. Sometimes law enforcement will be on a scene and they'll think, we don't need to be here, but MCOT should come. And so they already have an ongoing relationship. But what we did also is look very carefully at all the quantitative data. First of all, what are the different calls coming into 911 that appear to be of a behavioral health nature? And as you can imagine, it's dispatch. Somebody has to code these calls. And so dispatch initially codes them. And if they think it's a behavioral health issue, as opposed to maybe a criminal episode that needs to be responded to by 911, but instead just a behavioral health call, I say just, but dispatch will code it as a behavioral health call. 911 will respond, which is law enforcement. And then once the call is completed, law enforcement will code it. When we were looking at those calls that began and ended as behavioral health calls, it was really very few. It was less than 3 a day total in the entire county. And so for us, we went, well, that data in and of itself would not indicate any need to create a very expensive team. However, do we know if the recording of these calls is accurate? Do we know why it's so low? There were a lot of questions we had that we thought we need to look further. And so we thought, let's do a 2-part research project and implementation of this new program. Phase 1 is really collecting more data, but collecting real-time data. And so we are going to pair a Grace case manager, a newly hired Grace case manager, with a Bellingham Police Department to co-respond to calls that we think are behavioral health, and to start collecting data on what are the calls that truly are those that could be managed most effectively and most appropriately by a non-law enforcement team. And that we are putting together a number of questions that we are asking this team to collect. And that hopefully over a few months' time, we will get enough data to give us a better sense of what, how do we inform dispatch so they can safely and confidently dispatch a team that is not law enforcement. And that's really what this is all about. When we looked at the Cahoots model in Eugene or the STAR program in Denver or others that we think we wanted to copy, in fact, the vast majority of their calls are not out of the emergency 911 line, as I think we initially thought. They're out of the non-emergency law enforcement call-in number. So a regular 10-digit phone number. That isn't what City Council was asking us. They were asking for truly a 911 response. That's out of the dispatch out of the 911 emergency number. So as we've participated in a number of national calls with counties really across the nation, I keep asking, is anybody doing this? They say, oh yes, check with so-and-so. And then I check with so-and-so and they're not doing it. So I started to realize that, okay, so we're really launching new ground here, and we need to be very thoughtful about the data we collect, make sure that we do this right, make sure that we ensure the safety of anyone that goes out to a 911 emergency call. So that phase 1 hopefully will help us gather the data we need to inform dispatch. And then from there, once we feel like dispatch can confidently and safely dispatch folks who aren't law enforcement, we'll initiate phase 2, which is really the implementation itself of the program, which would be a team of an EMT and a behavioral health professional. And that our thought is they would be dispatched out of the EMS side of the 911 system, that we would probably ideally have 2 teams working from around 10 in the morning to 7 at night, somewhere in that period of time, because that's when it's most active. And the data for us showed that 3 and 4 p.m. in the afternoon is the busiest time for these kinds of calls. And that we would hope these 2 teams would have 4 10-hour days, 1 day shared, so they can hand off the cases they're working on, and that they would respond instead of law enforcement. And hopefully, what we know is just responding to crisis alone doesn't necessarily prevent future crises. for the people you're responding to. So we're also working closely with Lake Whatcom Center that received a federal grant from Health and Human Services to provide outreach and support to people in crisis. And so what we thought this team would do is after they responded to the crisis, they would then work with Lake Whatcom to take over the case, as it were, and really truly help to stabilize the person who has experienced a crisis, get them connected as well as engaged with services, and hopefully meet their needs on a more longer term basis. So that's the plan. There are things that are in process that will impact this. I think it was Raylene who talked about the 988 number. In the state legislative session, there was a law passed that basically wants to utilize the federally set aside number of 988, which is kind of like a suicide hotline, but also a behavioral health crisis line. In the implementation of 988, it also allows that 988 number to dispatch a team. And so for us, this changes everything. We have to make sure that we coordinate really closely with the process moving forward. 988 is supposed to be in place in the state next summer. So for us, the care crisis line that we use here in this region actually meets all the federal requirements to be a 988 number. So my guess is we'll have to figure out how to work with them and how to work with our 911 local dispatch. So it's getting a lot more complicated, as you can see with these new changes. And then I think the final thing I would say is that we have a shortage in the behavioral health workforce, mentioned earlier. And this work requires people who are pretty sophisticated in terms of their skills in de-escalation, as well as assessment and stabilization. So those folks are hard to come by. So we know that we have to make sure we hire the right people if we want a successful program. And then finally, in terms of us making sure that we want to get the service out well and in a robust way, we are checking in with different groups to make sure we haven't missed something. So in the not too distant future, there will be a Nami Forum where we will be asking especially loved ones or people who have had experience with the law enforcement system or other crisis outreach systems, what is it that we don't know? Here's what we think we know so far. Tell us where we're wrong. Tell us what we need to know. And we've also talked initially with the chairs of our Racial Equity Commission to get a sense of, again, what is it that we don't know that we need to be asking? What else do we need to find out? And then obviously checking with our behavioral health providers. And we have this afternoon a crisis oversight committee meeting where we will be talking with our treatment providers about what we don't know as well. So it's a huge, huge project if we're going to do it safely. Obviously, we want to not duplicate efforts. We want to align and coordinate the different people that are doing this work. And also we want to make sure we use other people's money whenever possible, as opposed to using local funds. So I see Mayor Fleetwood has a question.
Thank you, Anne. Really good work. I know our council is going to be thrilled to hear about the progress that's being made. What are you envisioning as it relates to the duration of time for phase 1 data collection?
Well, I think we thought 3 months might be plenty. Of course, we haven't really done this before, so, but that's our initial thought, 3 months. We're not gonna cut it off if we feel like we haven't collected the information we have, or if dispatch doesn't feel confident in what we offer them. But 3 months is our working timeline.
Thank you.
Arlene, I see your hand up. And you're on mute.
I have a question. When you're collecting data, I'm wondering how you're categorizing calls that would be related to people who are on alcohol or drugs and out of control, because that kind of a call can be very mixed in terms of what's really going on with that person. So,
So obviously, safety is our primary concern and our primary goal. And safety not just for the response team, for the person in crisis as well. And so if there are indicators to 911 that somebody might need physical control, for instance, I doubt that we would ever send this team out. I just don't think 911 would feel comfortable doing so. And I think if somebody seems to be not cognitively there, meaning that you can't engage them in some kind of de-escalation and stabilization efforts, that also might preclude the dispatch of this team. So I think those are things we're obviously going to be looking at. But we do know that you need the ability to get somebody from point A to point B when you're out on a call and you're trying to stabilize them. And so you need somebody there to engage with. It doesn't mean they need to be fully cognizant. They can certainly be disoriented. They could even be psychotic. It doesn't mean you can't do that. But there's a certain point in which you don't have a partner to work with. That is not objective. That is not something there's just a stat or a data point on. So that's the trick of this.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what the statistics actually are about those kind of calls, but my hunch would be that there would be quite a few.
There are, and I think also there's certain drugs on board that we know are more likely to drive aggressive behaviors. So we have to be careful about that as well. Raylene, I see you have a
Not
hand
so
up.
simple, is it? It's very complicated.
This is not simple to do well and safely.
Yeah,
And we want to make sure that even that, you know, just because somebody's a behavioral health professional doesn't mean they are good at de-escalating people.
yeah,
Right? They may be able to diagnose the person in front of them, but that doesn't mean they are going to be effective doing anything else. And just like law enforcement, we know even though somebody might arrive in a uniform, we have law enforcement officers throughout our county that have some superb skills in de-escalation, and our behavioral health partners that work with them tell us that. So it's just not a black and white issue. We know that.
mm.
Raylene?
Thank you, Anne. And this question may be something that Sheriff Elfo or Caleb might be able to answer. My question is for the dispatchers that are going to be dispatching. I know that they're required to have a telecommunicator 1 or telecommunicator 2 training. Is there going to be an alternate training for dispatching for this type of call? Is there something out there because this is so new? I just question whether it's available or not.
I'm not aware of any training that's been formulated or is available at this time, but it's certainly needed and certainly a concern of the dispatchers and the call takers at 911 that they're going to be asked to make these decisions, and the potential for an error on their part could have very severe consequences. So I think it's something that's going to have to be worked out and training provided.
Sheriff, is there increased liability for the dispatchers themselves, or is there any protection for them acting in good faith?
Well, they're acting within the scope of their employment. Normally, the governmental jurisdiction that hires them would indemnify them for any damages and would defend them. But there's still always the potential they get sued in their personal capacity. They're involved in a lawsuit. It happens here all the time. We get named in, particularly me as sheriff, I get probably a half a dozen a year that go away. They don't have, a lot of them, most of them don't have any merit and they're dismissed, but it's still, for someone that hasn't been sued, that's could be a traumatic experience for them to do that. But it's a serious concern.
Thank you.
I will say that EMS will be a partner on this team. And so they will always have the same radio communications with the dispatch that they always have. So there will be constant communication. The other thing I didn't say is that even though we were going to start this program in Bellingham proper in partnership with Bellingham Police Department, we have certainly worked with the Sheriff's Office on getting them more behavioral health support. And we are currently working with the region on funding a co-responder model so that we actually have a behavioral health professional paired with a deputy. So that would be different, but given the geographical challenges of our county, the Sheriff's Office did not feel like they could implement the program that Bellingham Police Department was wanting, simply because if there was a need for sirens and immediate backup, our geography is such that the Sheriff's Department might take longer than they would feel comfortable responding as backup.
I'd just like to comment because I'm pretty sure virtually all of us talk about our work on the task force and answer questions from people we come across in daily life. While the initial request to Ann's staff came from Bellingham City Council, the real impetus for this came out of grassroots voices in the past year or two. And so I want to credit all the partners in the task force and have us be able to acknowledge our work as being responsive to community identified needs. We've been talking about how better to communicate our work and the value of our work. And I think this is a forum that did pick up a call from people in the community who saw unmet needs. And then in response to that, with incredible care and thoughtfulness and professionalism, I think the way this exploration has developed is really to the credit of all the stakeholders in this task force. So I have my fingers crossed on how this rolls out further, Ann, but thank you for the quality of the work that you and all the partners here have done so far on this. And that actually turns out to be a pretty good segue into the next item on the agenda, which is an update.
Excuse me, Chairman, this is Jill here. Moonwater has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
That's okay. I'm just trying to slip in because I didn't speak up when you asked for jurisdictional updates. I was thinking of myself as agency and I just not enough coffee yet on a Monday morning. So perhaps I could follow Heather's presentation or just slip in an update about the DRC at this point in time, whichever is preferable.
Why don't you go ahead and report, and then we'll turn it over to Heather.
Okay, great, thanks. So just a brief agency update from the Dispute Resolution Center. I just wanted to let folks know that we're continuing to provide all of our services online, although we are exploring now what reopening is going to look like service area by service area. And there's so many different considerations with the wide range of services that we provide, from supervised visitation to mediation to training and coaching and so forth. So I will continue to keep folks updated, and we'll do that on social media and on our website as well. A couple of things of note, just a reminder that we are continuing to run the Safe Spaces program. And we're in particular interested in connecting further with community partners and interested folks who would like to help spread the word about the availability of this particular program. And the intent behind it is to create essentially an impartial service provider, the Dispute Resolution Center, to make ourselves available to folks who've had an experience with or within the city of Bellingham that they haven't felt that they've been able to bring directly to the city's attention, or they feel uncomfortable doing so, or haven't felt successful in doing so in the past. There's some sort of barrier that stops that communication flow. So we want people to know that we exist. Our case managers are available as a neutral third-party intermediary of sorts to gather that information, offer acknowledgement and validation of people's experiences that are happening here in Bellingham, and then follow the person's lead about what degree of information they want shared and what support they might need in communicating with the city. So we're happy to do one-on-one info sessions with community partners, smaller group sessions, come and speak to groups. We're working on a couple different levels to get the word out. So I wanted this group and anyone who's watching this recording to be aware of that particular program. And then the other thing that's new for us that we're really spending a lot of energy on is coming straight from the legislative session. It's Senate Bill 5160, which is predominantly focused on eviction prevention efforts. And there's 3 tiers to some significant programming. There's a variety of different things that were built into that particular bill, but there's 3 legs of a stool related to eviction prevention that are outlined in Senate Bill 5160. It's legal aid, rental assistance, and dispute resolution. So we're going to be working closely and have been in conversation with the Opportunity Council for the rental assistance component, and with law advocates and Northwest Justice Project for the legal aid component. And then at the Dispute Resolution Center, we've been staffing up and are doing a lot of training right now in preparation for the dispute resolution component. And the intent behind this, and all of these social issues are so interrelated, but is to help stabilize housing and to recognize that the eviction moratorium and the pandemic has had such a profound impact, not only on renters, but on landlords. And so as impartial dispute resolution providers, we're here to ensure that people are connected to the appropriate and needed resources, and that they're in communication with one another and reaching agreements that are going to work for them. And that above all else in this particular bill, that the intent is to divert people away from the court system. So people will need to, if the Superior Court opts into this program, will need to use the dispute resolution process with these in tandem with these other legs of the stool before eviction proceedings can occur in Superior Court. So we have reached out to and are awaiting more conversation and understanding from our court about whether or not Whatcom County Superior Court will opt into this program. But regardless, the Dispute Resolution Center will run some type of eviction resolution program, and it will be influenced by whether or not our court decides to opt in. The way the legislation was written, it makes it optional. There's been a pilot project running now for close to 6 months in about 7 other counties throughout the state. So we're following their lead, and we're working with our statewide association, and we will model our program depending on which direction our courts choose to go. So we'll keep you all apprised of that, and are really looking forward to working with our partners to support both landlords and tenants to get the support that they need and stabilize housing and support people as we move through the impacts of this particular part of the just trauma of this pandemic that we're experiencing. And of course, the other layer here is whether or not the governor will lift the moratorium on the 30th, and how that's going to impact our community members. So I see a question from Raylene, and so we'll see. We'll keep you posted on our end, but what we're doing internally at the center is staffing up, doing an enormous amount of training, and staying in conversation with our community partners. And our hope is to have a seamless experience for landlords and tenants to ensure that people get the right resources, and that we can help them move through this challenge and move forward. Raylene?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not too familiar with this bill, but I do know that the intent was to provide legal aid to the tenants but it didn't appear that there was going to be legal aid to the landlords. And there are some landlords that haven't been paid for quite some period of time that are looking at having to get rid of their property. Is there going to be mediation available? Is there going to be legal aid available? Are we going to be looking at using something as the Whatcom County Public Defense to do screening on these? How is this all working? Do you know?
Those are great questions. And I don't know how it's all going to work. Transparently, it's fascinating and remarkable that this bill got passed from, starting with no idea at the beginning of the session to a rapid session where this bill was created with this incredible mix of stakeholders. So it remains to be seen how some of these things are going to be worked out. But I believe you are correct that the bill predominantly speaks to legal aid for tenants, which is remarkable. And the legal aid community is, and I don't want to speak for them, but I know that they're working diligently to figure out how to roll that part of that bill out. And it's going to take them some time to ramp up and ensure that they have the resources available to support tenants. In the meantime, yes, mediation has always been available and will continue to be available. And we are available now, and we intend to launch this program we're expecting come July 1. There are a couple other bills, I think, that were passed in the session that will provide some additional support both to landlords and tenants, and we're working on wrapping our head around those bills and the implication of them. And it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. And what we're hoping to do at the center is ensure that people don't fall through the cracks, direct them to the resources that already exist, like Northwest Justice Project, law advocates, and others, and ensure that they have access to the right resources to make sure that they can reach agreements that are going to work for them. So there's lots of different moving parts right now, and as stakeholders, we're trying to, and community partners, trying to put our heads together to figure out how to handle this in a seamless way and support some public education to ensure that people know where to go and what they can access through the various different community agencies. Arlene and then Anne.
Arlene, you're trying to.
We could go. Okay, there you go.
My question was about safe spaces. I'm wondering how much response you've had so far. And the second question is, what are some typical situations coming up?
I would say we've had probably about 20 inquiries so far, approximately. And a good number of them were closer to the beginning of the year around the city's response to the encampment in front of City Hall. We've had some inquiries where folks have had challenging experiences interacting with law enforcement and felt that they could have been handled better. And we've had an inquiry about one in particular, a community member who was at a local park and encountered some individuals who had some clothing with some, I would say, hate group sort of symbolism on it, and had an uncomfortable and sort of unsafe interaction with them, and weren't sure how or where to report that, and didn't at the time feel that the online portal through the police department didn't give them the option to do that anonymously, and they were concerned about, they wanted someone to know what had happened but didn't want their name to be attached to that. So they contacted us, and we were able to facilitate them connecting with the police department and being able to share what their experience had been without attaching their name to that experience, just for their own personal safety. So there's quite a mix of different kinds of experiences that people are having.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anne?
I wanted to make sure people knew that there's a lot of dollars available right now for rental assistance that should help landlords. And I know you're aware of this, Moonwater, but I was really responding to Raylene's comment that there are a number of landlords who may need to give up their property. And I'm hoping that they're aware of this huge amount of money. Right now, it's over $16 million in our community alone that is available for rental assistance. And landlords, in fact, can apply on behalf of their tenants if their tenants don't apply. And then there is also more money coming from the American Rescue Plan Act. And the Opportunity Council is the entity that is distributing those funds.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
I'll throw in one other comment also to add response to Raylene's question. And I'll start by disclosing that I come out of a career in the civil legal aid system. So mostly that's to identify the fact that I was following that bill very closely. And Raylene, the legislature particularly took note of the fact that in eviction lawsuits, unlawful detainers, some very high percentage, something like 85% or perhaps even more, landlords are represented by an attorney in an eviction proceeding, whereas something like 12 to 15% of tenants are. So it was not an attempt to leave landlords high and dry, because most of them are not high and dry. It was an attempt to try to level the playing field and have this be a fair discussion and an equitable kind of resolution, which is the kind of neutral role that the WDRC would play. And secondary disclosure, I'm on Moonwater's board, so I'm really pleased that she's developing this program for our community.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Questions on Moonwater's report? And I'm sorry to have overlooked you earlier, Moonwater. Thank you very much for that information. So we will move on now to the next item on the agenda, and that is our member Heather Flaherty, with some support perhaps from Councilmember Buchanan, to talk about the work going on to implement a racial equity commission at the county level. Heather?
Thank you, Stephen. Councilmember Barry Buchanan, do you want to frame this up or introduce anything, or want me to just jump in?
I'll just do a real short intro, I guess. You know, a number of us have been working on kind of framing out a program for a racial equity commission, and Chuckanut Health Foundation has been selected as the as kind of the manager of this design process. And we're having a great event coming this Saturday that Heather's going to talk about. And I think you all should have received an invitation through our office and the council. And we hope you can attend. But Heather has just done a fabulous job of leading us on our journey through this. And I'm proud to turn this over to her. So Heather.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I want to just start by saying that I actually don't feel like I'm in the leadership role at all, in a really great way. Su-Ling Zhao and Christina Michelle Martins have been our two leaders on this concept, and we're really privileged and honored to work with them and partner with them. And also Councilmember Buchanan has been a tremendous leader on this. Mayor Fleetwood has been a huge participant and leader as well. And Prosecutor Ritchie, who's not here today, but a lot of task force representation actually on the working group that's been in the details weekly, daily, trying to get this launched. So I'm prepared to just share kind of the journey to here, or I can just share specifically more about the visioning session. And I'd love to entertain any questions, and I can be very brief and give us back a gift of time. And I also really highly recommend inviting Su-Ling Zhao and Christina Michelle Martins at some point to the task force for a fuller presentation. So any indication on, should I take my walk you down our path to where we're at? Does that sound good? Okay. So I'm here on this committee actually as a citizen advisor, not technically with my Chuckanut Health Foundation hat, but I bring Chuckanut Health with me everywhere I go because I can't not. And in the field of community health, which is what we work in, we ask the question why a lot. Why are things happening? Why are only half of our children showing up to school kindergarten ready? Why are our Native American neighbors living on average 12 years less than our white neighbors? And when you ask why for some of these questions, that doesn't take very long before you get to a really foundational and really, really serious systemic issues like systemic racism as reasons why we see outcomes that are different. So we have been really committed to this idea of health equity, which is a fancy word for, it's really just trying to make sure everybody has the same access to opportunities to be as healthy as possible. And that means we have to remove barriers to health like systemic racism, discrimination, and poverty. So last March, we started this pandemic and moved into a virtual world. And then in May, a man named George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. And I think the entire nation paused and stopped and could not ignore that there are systemic racism issues across the board. And we actually see it across all of our systems. We see them in education, in law enforcement, in banking, in financial institutions, in who's getting calls back for interviews. And our community responded to that. And rightfully so, I think people in leadership responded by listening and by wanting to really understand what is the lived experience of people of color in our community. And what happened to get to here is that a few things kind of wove together in the magical way that it does in Whatcom County. Prosecutor Eric Ritchie reached out to a number of groups and individuals to listen deeply, to understand how can I help you, and what can we do better in the prosecutor's office. And Mayor Fleetwood and County Executive Sat Paul Sadhu also hosted some listening sessions. And we have some themes from those where people came and talked for hours about things that they're seeing in our community. They talked about police officers, they talked about representation in our elected leadership and in our government. They talked about the importance of taking care of our children and the prevention pieces, right? We talk a lot here on this task force about the way downstream impacts of when people end up in our criminal justice system. And there's another part of this that's really upstream in making sure people have the best shot at a great trajectory and never end up in the criminal justice system in the first place. So we have these 2 listening sessions happening and a lot coming out of these about things people in our community want us to work on, and stories about people of color not feeling safety in our community and not feeling real belonging. And those are really core to your ability to exist, let alone to thrive and be healthy. And then Chuckana, we've been working, and I want to also give some credit to Healthy Whatcom, which is the Whatcom County Health Department's community health improvement planning process. We've been working to understand the local data. And when you dig into our local data, you see racial disparities in everything that we are monitoring, in kindergarten readiness, in our 3rd grade reading level, in who's getting suspended from schools, who's getting disciplined, who's experiencing homelessness, who's poverty and who's living in poverty, their income disparities, our life expectancy rates are different based on race and income, and who's experiencing anxiety and depression and suicidality. And the list goes on, and it's overwhelming. And then along comes Sue and Christina, and they're asking these really incredible, important questions about data and trying to understand our local systems. And Prosecutor Ritchie said, you know what, you're asking the kinds of questions the DV Commission asks. And maybe this is something that really could become a racial equity commission that's focused on racial equity data and how we can do better in our systems. And we realize too that in all of this, often in our conversations, we're missing the people who are closest to the issues. We talk about that at our task force as well, that we don't have, it's really hard to get the lived experience to come and participate in government task force opportunities for a variety of reasons. And so this all came together, and Chuckanut Health Foundation made a big commitment to health equity as a long-term strategic priority. And really what we wanted to do with that commitment is amplify voices in our community that aren't always heard and invest in community-driven solutions that will end systemic barriers to health, like poverty, discrimination, and racism. So we all came together, and we're partnering with Sue and Christina and following their lead on how to make this happen in a way where it's community owned and community led, and really stepping up from that. It's not just community engagement, but it's community built. And Sue Ling has an amazing quote where she says, "You don't need to pull up a seat or be invited to the table if it's your table. So let's build this in a really intentional way. Let's build this table together and center the voices of people with lived experiences with racism and discrimination so that we can not perpetuate the systemic outcomes that we currently are seeing." And we are really committed to the value of equity in the entire process of developing this, not just equity in the outcomes. So the process from here, where we're at, we are hosting a big community visioning summit on Zoom this Saturday. Please come if you can. We're really hoping to get close to 300 people there, about 200 are RSVP'd. And there's an opportunity also for people to apply to be part of a stakeholders group that will meet monthly. This will be the accountability community that will help make sure that we're keeping equity in our process. And the outcome will be that we'll be making a suite of recommendations to our government partners at the end of the day, where we're hoping there will be an ordinance that will establish a commission that will be have a very well-informed scope of what this commission will do and focus on, and including mechanisms for making sure it stays community owned and community led and government supported so that it can be very effective and make long-term changes in all of those systems that we see those disparities in. So I think I touched on the high level parts, but are there questions from this group or anything that maybe I wasn't clear on?
Could you say just a touch more about what you hope to come out of the Visioning Summit this Saturday?
Yeah, the Visioning Summit will be structured so that the first part of the morning will be recorded, and we will hear from people who've been involved in the work, from Sue and Christina. We'll hear from Mayor Fleetwood and County Executive Sadhu, and you'll hear more details about how we got here and what we're up to. And then we have some national colleagues joining us, people who are working on these kinds of commissions and working on racial disparities in their communities. So we have somebody from South Carolina. We have Chris Bang from the Office of Civil Rights in King County. And then we have somebody from Oregon as well. And then really most of the time is designed to be interactive because we want to get as much community input as possible. And we are building on the foundations of community input that we've already received. We have some great reports from the listening sessions over the summer with Mayor Fleetwood and Executive Sadhu. And this is really trying to take all of those themes and focus them and get to the part where we can start doing things together and take the actions together. So we'll be setting up some breakout rooms and getting people in small groups to really talk about what should this be doing, what could this be doing, what do you want to see us working on, how will we make sure it's effective and that we're bringing hearts and minds along at the same time as we're centering the lived experience. And then from there, we'll be culling all that, taking all that and distilling it and eventually turning it into some policy documents. So.
Raylene has her hand up. Raylene?
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate the work that you're putting into this, as well as Barry Buchanan and Seth Fleetwood and all the other members. Something that's come up in the courts over the years is the problem, people not being able to get here, and transportation's been a huge problem. You know, whether it's a license or they can't get to Bellingham to get resources. So they have to get treatment for their DUI that they got. And they have to go to probation, and they live out in Blaine. So then they have to figure out what bus they have to take the entire day off of work to try to get this. And if they miss one appointment because the other appointment went over, it's a problem. I would somehow, I mean, I look at this from the criminal justice perspective, but I know it's not just that. It's from all different points of life. And I would love to see housing and insurance sessions in each local community, whether it's once a month, once a week, that people are aware that they can come and do this, whether it's on a Wednesday afternoon when we have court in Blaine, they could come to Blaine and apply for the resources that they need so that they can do some of this treatment rather than having to travel to Bellingham and take an entire day off work. It seems like bringing the resources to the individuals would be easier than trying to get the individuals to the resources. I could be wrong, but it's just a food for thought. Thank you.
I'm writing this down, and I think we'll be in touch. And I think you're exactly right. And this is, I mean, that's one of the concepts of this whole thing, is meet people where they're at and really try to remove barriers. And Raylene, so where the next phase of this work is really intense community engagement and building that community ownership. So there's a few ways that we're going about that. There'll be some mass surveys distributed. That stakeholders group is a really key way if people want to like stay committed and meet monthly for the rest of the year. The Community Visioning Summit for people who want to opt into the Zoom event. But then we also would like to just have key informant interviews and focus groups for people who aren't able to participate in an ongoing basis, but feedback like that is really critical, that would be helpful to the design of this commission. So for all of you, if there are focus groups that you would like us to host, just let me know. I'm looking too at Maya's screen with the public defenders. I think there's a ton of amazing input from public defenders and all of you really. So, and I see Mayor Cortice on the call too. We are really trying to be very intentional about diversity in all forms, and particularly geography. I mean, Whatcom County, we don't want this to be just a Bellingham commission. We want this to be all of Whatcom County. So we're really trying to focus on small cities and our rural neighbors, and how can we make sure they're involved as well, because it needs all of us. It takes all of us to make this kind of transformational change.
Well, thanks for that input. Yeah, if you can keep me informed on how I can inform the small city groups on all this, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm struck by how utterly thorough your plan is. And I think our task force could maybe borrow some ideas from you for our goals as well. So I appreciate that so much.
Thank you, Arlene. Council member Tyler Bird from Whatcom County Council actually has made the request that we document the process really well so that it can be replicated. And there are a couple documents I'd like to send out. Maybe I could share those with Jill if you're interested. One is just a cursory review and scan of the available data on disparities that exist in Whatcom County, if you're interested in looking at that. And the second is this model called the Spectrum of Community Engagement to Ownership. And it's a really nice framework for how government can actually engage with community members. And there's a whole range from marginalization to community ownership. And where we live a lot is in consulting with community members, but the impact of that can be tokenization. And the activities of that are public comment and focus groups and community forums. And we want to move more to that delegated power
which is where we're really grateful that Mayor Fleetwood and County Executive Sadhu and the councils approved this contract, because having the contract with Chuckna allows it to be a community-based process. And that's part of that delegated power. And the safe spaces is actually a really beautiful example of that as well. When you have memorandums of understandings and agreements with community-based organizations, that can lead to more authentic community ownership and engagement. So we'll be documenting, we'll be sharing. I'd love to entertain any and all questions. I can tell you that this has really been challenging. This is not easy work. And we would love everybody in this call to be on the team and to help support it. And the goal is to have us all sit side by side with the issues in front of us and not yell at each other and not make it that there's issues in between us, but how can we work on these things together? Because we all want everybody to have the same access to opportunities to, first of all, be safe and belong, but also to thrive. I think we all can agree on that. So this is one way that we're going to try to get there in our community. I think
for the presentation and for the work that's going on. Any
Thanks
other
for
questions?
Sorry, I just said thanks for the opportunity to share more with you.
It looks like Caleb has his hand raised.
Yeah, Caleb, go.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand virtually, but Heather, thank you for that. I have a question. Is there some place where the Zoom is posted? I was looking through the packet and obviously there's a lot of info there.
Yeah, if you go to the chucknethealthfoundation.org, right on the home page, there's a button at the top that says register for the Community Visioning Summit. And then there's links to more information. We'd love law enforcement representation there. We'd love government system representation, and we'd also really love law enforcement representation on the stakeholders group.
And just all of you know, I'll be sending out an invitation to all of you and various other boards and commissions a little bit later on today. So you can have that information on joining the summit.
Okay. Sorry, I'm really interested in hearing the perspective of people of color who are justice involved and finding out what their experience has been and if there are ways that we can improve overall that interaction.
Thank you, Caleb.
Thanks again, Heather. Good luck on Saturday.
Thanks.
So we're on the item of the agenda that calls for other business. Is there any other business? Okay, it appears not. Jill, would you check for public comment, please?
Yes, thank you. We have a number of attendees at today's meeting. If any of you would like to speak to the task force, please virtually raise your hand now by selecting the raise hand icon or by pressing *9 if you're joined by phone. No hands are raised.
Okay. Well, that will conclude our meeting then. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 14th. Obviously, we heard about a lot of business that will be going on between now and then. So we'll check back with you all in about a month. Thank you for attending this morning and have a good rest of your day. We're adjourned.